Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. A Louisiana law was defended before the Supreme Court this week. While a ruling will come much later, the decision could have a major impact on abortion cases. We'll look at this story tonight, as well as the legislature preparing to open a new session, plus the sale of East Jefferson Hospital. We'll also look at the politics of the upcoming Louisiana presidential primary, as well as the effect of the virus scare on the local economy, and the number of international nonstop flights from New Orleans continuing to expand. At the gate for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Stephanie Grace, columnist, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. Kathy Finn, freelance journalist and business columnist for New Orleans Magazine. And Tyler Bridges, reporter, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. And we're going to go over to Errol first, because everybody's mind really right now is coronavirus and what is it doing to us in terms of economy and businesses being interrupted.
Well, it's giving us a lot to think about, especially yesterday there was a big gathering of city agencies and related departments, just to call it like a tabletop sort of experiment, just to go over the procedures. And I think one of the most important observations made by Councilman Jason Williams, who says, with New Orleans being a tourist town, and when it's just having gone to Mardi Gras and people throwing beads and handling all kinds of stuff, there's a possibility there's somebody in town who already has it. And it could be. It doesn't mean it's going to spread or anything's going to happen, but would you just think about, the nature of the city and people who go through it, there's a possibility. So we just need to watch out for that person and wash our hands if we shake
wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands.
Yeah. If we shake hands with them. There were two major gatherings scheduled for the end of March that were canceled this week. One was the Worldwide Petrochemical Conference, and something else that was called Explorance, which had to deal with dealing with the environment, and both of them canceled. And what people are wondering about is, of course, as we get into April, which is the festival month with French Quarter Festival and Jazz Fest and across the state, will it have an impact on that? So we just have to see it at this point. We saw today South by Southwest, which is a big festival held in Austin, was canceled. But I kind of tend to think it's going to take a lot more to cancel the festivals here in New Orleans. But we're on edge, and the other thing that's being affected, of course, is flights. So a lot of flights are either cutting down and I saw that one travel agency today that had some trips that were booked contacted its people and pushed back the due date for payments until the customer can be a little bit more short about things.
Sure. Because people really are concerned about boarding a plane right now, and also going into public places. In terms of Louisiana, do we have any confirmed cases at all?
Yet.
No.
Not right, but
It has to be affecting the cruise ship business out of New Orleans. I mean, just because it's affecting the whole industry anyway. So I don't see any way that it's not affecting cruises out of New Orleans as well, even though Louisiana apparently has no identified cases yet.
Yeah. The other cruises out of New Orleans pretty much go like to Mexico and Central America. We don't have any Asian cruises or anything like that.
But the point is they bring in a lot of people from everywhere.
Come in from other places,
and then people are getting trapped on the boats. And, that's pretty scary
a
too.
concern for folks. There's a boat at San Francisco, Francisco, your favorite city, that people are on it, 3,500 people on the boat that they're not letting off right now. Well, the city of New Orleans, though, has been talking to the public, this week. City Health Officer Dr. Jennifer Avegno has, been fielding questions from press, et cetera, saying that we're prepared here, that definitely the city is prepared for it. Once again, she keeps saying, wash your hands.
Yeah.
I mean, just personally sort of prepare yourself.
The carnival
as well.
season really dodged this because people were talking about it a little bit, but the talking really didn't intensify until right after Mardi Gras. So if this would have started like 3 or 4 weeks ago, it could have had a really devastating effect on Mardi Gras.
No one would have wanted the coconuts being handed out by Zulu, right?
Well, yeah, they're still taking the coconuts.
I think they would have.
They just washed the coconuts. So.
I think I did read today, though, that Tulane Hospital and I believe over at Lakeside Hospital.
Tulane Hospital is taking precautions for anybody using their facilities. Also, LSU canceled all summer abroad programs today. So
I think Oxnard has taken some steps as well.
Yeah, with Tulane,
With their own
anybody was going to be
employees.
screened. I mean, to the extent of how you'd be screened, I'm not sure yet. But that was visitors and patients who, of course, would be screened. Okay, well, all we could do, just like everybody else, is wait and see. what's going to turn of this. Stephanie, another thing we're going to be waiting for is a decision from the U.S. Supreme Court where Louisiana law on abortion was defended.
Right. Now, if we have to specify which Louisiana law on abortion, because there are a lot of them, more than any other country, or any other state, excuse me. Obviously, it's a very anti-abortion state, very anti-abortion legislature. We've had anti-abortion governors, Democrat and Republican. The law in question here, this isn't the one that everyone was fighting about last year that John Bel Edwards signed. This is one that Bobby Jindal signed. And it doesn't have to do with outlawing abortion. It has to do with restricting it, but not directly, indirectly. And this is one of the tactics of the anti-abortion movement.
Through the admitting
privileges.
Yes. So the idea is there are now 3 active abortion clinics in the state, and it's very hard for the doctors to work there to get admitting privileges at local hospitals, largely because hospitals don't really want to deal with this. You know, they're protesters and you know, the kind of blowback of it. And really that abortion medically is a very safe procedure. So you don't really, you know, people are not getting rushed to the hospital all the time. And medical professionals will tell you that, medical organizations will tell you that. This is something that is being billed as pro-women's health, pro-safety. And it basically means that abortion clinics would have to shut down if they don't have a doctor who has admitting privileges at a hospital within 30 miles. Again, Jeff Landry, the Attorney General, is a very proponent of it. He has a hashtag Protect Women. I mean, he's saying this is to make sure that these facilities are safe. Again, medical experts disagree with that. And then the question is, the kind of countervailing question is, does it present an undue burden, which is the standard the Supreme Court has set for restricting abortion, basically saying it cannot present an undue burden on women seeking this legal procedure. So the law was passed in 2014. Bobby Jindal signed it. It went to court. A district court in Baton Rouge basically rejected it, saying that it was not medically necessary and it did present an undue burden. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeal reversed that, so that's how it ended up going to the Supreme Court. And the interesting thing is there is a similar case out of Texas based on a very similar law where the Supreme Court in 2016 said, no, it does, again, not medically necessary, does present an undue burden because it would shut down clinics. The difference is not necessarily in the laws, the difference is in the court. So since 2016, Anthony Kennedy gone, Neil Gorsuch, and Brett Kavanaugh there. And they are both, so the expectation is that this is a very anti-abortion court now, the majority, and this is the first case where we will see how far that goes.
And what about Chief Justice?
And that's the question because he's a conservative, but he also has, in some cases, specifically the Obamacare cases that they've heard, gone the other way to kind of protect precedent and, not blow things up to the extent that some people want him to. So he's being very closely watched. He's probably the swing vote, whereas Anthony Kennedy used to be the swing vote.
So the law was not enforced right away. He was one who agreed to it not being enforced,
correct.
So that this hearing could come at a later date.
Yes.
But he did support the Texas law. Is that correct?
He supported. I'm not remembering exactly.
Okay.
I think he didn't, but I'm not sure.
Okay. So, but
again, different makeup of the court is.
The argument was made. We're not going to hear about it. But also, I think an interesting point is that this piece of legislation wasn't it authored by a Democrat?
Was. Katrina Jackson. I mean, this is one of the interesting things about Louisiana. You have a lot of major anti-abortion legislation authored by Democrats in the legislature and signed by Democratic governors, John Bel Edwards and also Kathleen Blanco. So it really is where something is very much a Democrat-Republican issue in other parts of the country. Here you have, some Democrats who are right in the forefront.
And so in terms of Roe v. Wade,
yes,
where does this fit into the attempt to overturn Roe v. Wade?
So there are basically two tactics that the anti-abortion movement is pursuing. One is to get at Roe v. Wade and basically have that invalidated, and that would mean the decisions would go back to the states. And Louisiana already has something on the books. Kathleen Blanco signed it that says if Roe v. Wade is overturned, abortion would be mostly legal. There is an exception for the health of the woman. But other states have already passed legislation saying it would be legal here. So it's really going to create a a situation where, you know, you can get on a plane and go to New York maybe, but you can't get an abortion here or a legal one.
So when do you think we'll get a decision from the Supreme Court?
Well, those, you know, the kind of hotly contested ones usually come at the end, and the end of the
June.
June is you know, there's always those last few days in June when you're waiting for the big cases. I would predict it's then.
Okay, we'll be waiting for that.
Yes.
So then it would be an issue potentially in the presidential race.
Very much so, yes.
And sort of segueing into that in terms of the presidential race, next month, is
April
the-
4th.
Yeah, Louisiana presidential primary for both Democrats and Republicans. Let's talk about the Democratic race first.
You don't want to talk about who might win the Republican.
No, let's
Bill Weld from Massachusetts.
I think we kind of know what that was, and probably for the Democrats too. But let's talk about it. Biden, you feel is a shoo-in?
Well, never. I don't want to say he's a shoo-in, but you know, the interesting thing is, a week ago, or even 10 days ago, we could have said, wow, there'd be maybe a bunch of candidates on the ballot, but then everything seemed to change with South Carolina in the primary, with Biden making a surprising comeback and winning, and then Buttigieg getting out of the race, Klobuchar getting out of the race, and then Bloomberg did it as well on Tuesday, and then Warren on Thursday. So right now it is Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden, the candidates that appear to be the only ones left for the ballot. And again, it's a closed ballot on April 4th here in Louisiana.
African American support really helped change the direction of Biden's campaign, certainly in South Carolina, and then with Super Tuesday. What's going to look like here in Louisiana?
Yeah, and the expectation is that will hold as well. That about 57% of the registered Democrats in the state are African American, and as we saw in South Carolina and on Super Tuesday, they went overwhelmingly for Biden, and Bernie Sanders didn't do very well.
Bernie Sanders hasn't done well with the black vote. And it's not like there's a reason. It's not like he's anti-black or anything like that. That's any feeling. But I think it's just because Biden, they identify with Obama. They've just known Biden for long, but they've never done well. And I saw the other night Rachel Maddow questioned Sanders about that, and he says, "Well, I get the vote of people of color." I mean, he broadened the base. Instead, you can see they didn't get the black vote.
Yeah.
But he did broaden the base. But for some reason, he hasn't been that very strong. There's no way that Biden's not going to win the Louisiana primary. I mean, and again, we're just talking about among Democrats. So.
Right.
And it's worth noting that in the primary of Louisiana 4 years ago, Hillary Clinton got 71% of the vote to 23% for Bernie Sanders. And again, nationally, we've all seen and heard about the Democrats nationally coalescing behind Joe Biden, and Bloomberg doing that, for example, when he got out of the race on Tuesday.
In the Louisiana primary, people need to
Wednesday.
understand it's a party primary, so it doesn't really reflect the national election on that Tuesday, which would be a totally different thing, you know. So.
And so as an independent, you can't vote in either GOP or Democratic.
Yeah, Republicans and independents can't vote. And people who want to vote in the Democratic primary to vote either for Bernie or for Joe Biden, they have until March 14th to do it online.
And Bloomberg did pull out of the race, but he had just set up headquarters here. So is he going to stay and support, throw his support here?
Well, he has
also?
5 offices here. He has 30 staffers. He was the only candidate who actually set up a real operation here in the state of Louisiana. And we don't know yet whether he's going to keep that operation here for Biden, or Biden will simply absorb it.
But he is endorsing Biden.
Yeah.
And we should add that Biden has some high-profile endorsers here in Louisiana. Cedric Richmond, the congressman, is one of his national co-chairs. He's been along from the beginning. This week, Mitch Landrieu did formally endorse him.
Right.
He's been kind of saying supportive things for a long time, but he also was kind of Bloomberg curious too, and had some of his former staffers were working for Bloomberg. But he is now officially on board.
Okay, April 4th, the primary for GOP and for the Democrats.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, all right, thanks a lot, guys. Kathy, over to you. East Jefferson General Hospital, and there's a proposal now to sell it to LCMC, but it has to go before the voters.
Right, it's the final hurdle. I think the people, members of the hospital board itself and of the Jefferson Parish Council, I think they're just kind of waiting to exhale to make sure this deal goes through. So far, it's been unopposed. Both of those boards and the council has approved it. They had a meeting last week, in the past week, and it was unanimous everywhere. I don't think anyone spoke against, even as members of the public spoke against this deal. It's a deal with LCMC Health would take over the hospital to the tune of $90 million guaranteed up front. That $90 million, along with what is left of East Jefferson's reserves, would go to pay off all of the debt on the hospital. So like $140 million or something like that, which the council will be very relieved to have gone, because it's, as a service district hospital, it is their hospital. So it would take off the debt. In addition, LCMC would commit to putting $100 million into the hospital over a 5-year period. So about $20 million of investment per year, which is about 4 or 5 times what East Jeff has been able to do for itself over the past 5, 6, 8 years, something like that. So most people involved, all people involved as far as I can tell, see this as a good deal. It's far from, I think, the best deal that they could have gotten had they cut a deal some time ago. As you may remember, this has been going on for at least a decade, maybe a little more than that, where the council, Jefferson Parish, has been trying to do something about both East Jeff and West Jefferson Medical Center. I think one thing that's helping this along is the fact that LCMC, a couple of years ago, did a lease management agreement with West Jefferson Hospital, and that appears to be working out well. They have put considerable money into it, capital investments into the hospital, and by most reports, you can see the results of it. You can see what's going on at West Jeff, and things have improved dramatically. So I think that gives the council, parish council, some confidence that something similar can happen with East Jefferson. But both of those hospitals struggled, and they've struggled for a long time. East Jeff now is 50 years old. They've not kept up with the times. They've not been able to keep up. They're not competitive with the growing monoliths they have around them.
It used to be a powerhouse. It used to be
50 years ago it was.
EJ and Oxford were the 2 big players.
Right, but
25
right
years
now,
ago it was.
The sale is needed.
Sale
basically.
is needed. It's make this sale, make it happen, or go bankrupt. And they've all been very forthright about that. The hospital board chairman said that at the meeting the other day. And their bond counsel, everyone acknowledges that fact. They don't have any options left. If they don't, they have to get public approval, so this will go on the ballot. As it stands now, it will go on the ballot on May 9th. So the voters of Jefferson Parish
So it
must
comes up
approve
pretty
this.
quickly. This May 9th?
May 9th. Yeah, in fact, I think they expedited the action with the State Bond Commission in order to get it on that ballot. So, they are up against a wall because the lenders on this bonded debt that I made reference to have put forbearance on them and says something has to happen by June 30th, or else they'll force them into bankruptcy.
And there
So-
was, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I mean, I started covering this in the 90s when I was working in the Jefferson office of the Picayune, and there were attempts back then to get some of the community hospitals together. There was such resistance to it. There was such kind of sentimentality towards the idea that it was their community hospital. And
This all reminds me a lot of,
Yeah.
I covered the banking industry for years, and Louisiana's banking laws were just, so parochial and so outdated for so long. And this reminds me, it's kind of a
Yeah.
similar situation, because with the service district hospitals, they were created to give the community, the local community, their own hospital. And so it was a big kind, that's why it was such a powerhouse in the beginning. But healthcare has changed so much. You have to grow. You have to be able to have networks. As a service district hospital, they couldn't even expand beyond their parish boundaries.
So, this is a short window of time to really explain all of this to the community.
Right.
Well, they're putting some money into an education program. I predict that you'll be seeing quite a bit of information coming out of campaigning, actually, out of the board of the hospital and the council, because they really want voters to understand that this has to happen.
And
it's
LCMC
very
too, I
important.
think.
And LCMC.
They want this to happen badly
want
too.
this to happen.
And it doesn't involve a new tax or anything like that, so it's not
No.
it's not expensive. So that's going to make it easier to
And,
sell.
and LCMC would actually own it. It would own the hospital. It
Yes.
runs West Jeff and
Yeah,
also
they have a management
New Orleans
agreement with
East
West Jeff.
and also
They're-
UMC, of course.
They have the University Hospital downtown. They have Children's in Truro is where it started. LCMC started with Children's in Truro. And now they have the New Orleans East Hospital, the University Medical Center,
Right.
and West Jeff.
And their main competition is Ochsner, which has
Right,
hospitals
right.
all over too.
Okay,
Yes.
so what, May 9th?
May
is
9th
when
ballot,
people, the
yes.
Jefferson
Yeah.
Parish residents go to vote on that. All right, thanks a lot, Kathy. Errol, international nonstops. We have a couple of more from New Orleans.
Yeah, New Orleans has never had a lot of international nonstops. We've had some. There was a time when we were a hub for Central American flights. There were 3 Central American airlines, Taka, Sasha, and Laksa, that used to fly to those countries, and then they went under. They were pretty much absorbed by the American, like Continental Airlines, and so and lately to go to those places you've had to go through Houston or Miami. But gradually there's a build up. This airline, Spirit Airlines, which is a budget airlines, announced that starting in June, it's going to have 2 nonstop international flights, not every day, like 2 or 3 days a week. One of them will be to Cancun, and one of them will
San
be
Pedro
to
Sula,
San Pedro
yeah.
Sula, Honduras, which used to be a big destination between New Orleans and Central America, because there's such a huge Honduran population, and so that destination hasn't been served well for a long time, and so that's coming back, and so there's gradually a little bit of a build-up. If you look at the number of nonstops, the big picture, there's something I think like 9 nonstops. The big one, of course, is British Airlines, 4 times a week flight to London. The one that people are wondering about is Condor Airlines, which came in and it was doing a seasonal business. It supposedly was doing okay with it, but it is owned by a company called Thomas Cook. This is a travel agency out of London, and Thomas Cook really essentially folded during the summer. Now, the Condor Airlines part of Thomas Cook is doing okay, but there's concern about will the Thomas Cook situation drag down Condor, and so we don't know exactly that. But anyway, we are seeing a build up, and we've got a couple of Canadian flights that are coming back, and so and usually it's like newer airlines. It's not as much the Legend Airlines as like Copa Airlines that goes to Panama City that are moving in and establishing their niche in the market.
So from what I was just checking my notes here for, there are 56 nonstop destinations, not all international.
Right,
But
56.
That's a pretty good
well,
number.
Well, every time an airplane takes off, its first stop is always nonstop. Okay, all right.
We hope.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
pray
yeah.
for us.
Okay,
Yes.
and so that you can count on. But the question is, how many does it go to beyond that and all
Yeah.
that? And so for a long time, if you tried to fly from New Orleans, it was like go through Atlanta and then transfer to somewhere else out of Atlanta. And we're getting a little bit beyond that, and also establishing more of an international
That's great.
market.
All right. Okay, thanks a lot. All righty. Legislature in session, and we go to you two. Start with you, Stephanie. What are we looking for to happen in this legislative session?
Well,
What'd you say?
it's same governor, different legislature, so that's a big storyline. Governor Edwards was reelected, but there was a lot of turnover because of term limits. He has a more Republican legislature than he had for the first 4 years, and he has new leaders, and that's going to be interesting, I think. A lot of us don't know that much about them. They're not from this area. The new House Speaker, Clay Schexnayder, is from Gonzales. The new Senate President, who replaced John Alario, who of course was a towering local figure, is Paige Cortez. He's from Lafayette. We asked him, there was a press club lunch this week, and we asked John Bell Edwards how his relationship was with them, and he used the phrase just fine. He said, we're talking and it's just fine and our personal relationship is just fine. I expect everything to be just fine. So, just fine is going to be a change if that's true. It was better than just fine with John Alaria. He was very he did very well in the Senate. John Alaria was a big supporter of his agenda. It was much worse than just fine in the House because he really was at odds with the House leadership, Taylor Barra, Cameron Henry, for 4 years.
And Cameron Henry is now in the Senate.
He is, yes, but not in a leadership position. Right. So Schexnayder in the House was elected. There was a contested election for Speaker. He's a Republican, but he was elected with more Democratic support than Republican, so that John Bell Edwards supported that quietly. So that speaks well for their relationship, although he also kind of has to prove that he's not too close to the governor.
Okay, let's put Tyler in here. And what are we going to be looking at in terms of issues and legislation and important topics to be coming up?
Yeah, as people may remember, the governor said his biggest priority, if he was reelected, was more money for early childhood education, and more money had been put in 2019. So he wants to continue that effort. Also, more money for K through 12 schools, more money for higher education as well. The biggest issue that there will be a fight on, I think we can agree on, will be the so-called tort issue. The insurance industry made a push last year during the legislative session, and then they pushed really hard to elect like-minded legislators who will limit the ability for people who believe they've been injured through negligence of a company to sue or to sue and receive a big amount of money. And the governor has a background as a trial lawyer, was allied with the trial lawyers. And so the business interests of the governor will be locking horns on that issue.
And of course, trial lawyers are certainly they're not really into tort reform, so we'll be seeing some opposition and really some horns locking, I would guess, in that issue up there in Baton Rouge.
Yeah, and it's interesting note, and Stephanie and I were talking about this earlier, that the governor did not really have an ambitious agenda that he was elected on last year, and what he has put forth this year is not a particularly ambitious agenda. Normally, you would expect a governor, especially in their second term, that this is the time when they would be most ambitious before the sort of lame duck period begins, but he does seem to have kind of a modest agenda.
He does.
Early childhood education is a really big issue, and it's one that is very costly to really get it
but,
done
But it
correctly.
also has a lot of bipartisan support.
Yeah.
So the business community has really gotten involved in pushing for it, educating on how it's an economic issue, not just a moral issue.
Right.
So so it shouldn't be a huge fight on that front. He is going to go for the things that he said he campaigned on. He did last time: minimum wage, gender equity issues. Which
Good luck.
Good luck in
Yeah,
this
okay,
legislature.
we'll see what happens March 9th, this Monday.
Yes.
It all
Yeah.
begins.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, time to look ahead. E.
Southern Rep Theater has announced that it's having an urgent financial crisis and is shutting down operations for a few weeks at least, saying they need to raise $350,000 by the end of the month. They purchased the old St. Rose de Lima Church, did a beautiful job with the building, but apparently they have a lot of expenses that are related to that. And so they're in the fundraising mode right now. And it's they've done great theater, so you hope it
All right.
does well. So
Steph?
I have a column in Sunday's paper looking at the kind of regional power balance in the new legislature. Bottom line, New Orleans area has lost a lot of influence, not just New Orleans, but also Jefferson and St. Tammany.
Okay. Kathy?
Well, as I mentioned, look to hear more from East Jefferson General Hospital and LCMC about the May 9th ballot. They have a short time in which to educate voters and really convince voters that this is a good deal and that it has to happen. So we'll be hearing a lot from them, I predict, over the next several weeks.
All righty, thanks, Kathy.
Yeah, and so again, on Monday, we'll see the governor offer his speech to the legislature, laying out his issues. So I think that's for something people to take a look for. The session, it goes until June 1st. Another thing, as we mentioned earlier, to look for next week, again, March 14th, is the deadline for people to be able to register in the Democratic primary of April 4th.
All right.
And they can only register online.
Or Republican.
Or
if they
Republican,
want
too.
to
Okay,
participate in that.
all right, guys. Thanks a
Okay.
lot for being here. Thank you all for joining us. See you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.